Well, hello, this is Mr. Ippolito. I spent a lot of time when I was a student at UCLA studying the speeches and writings of Abraham Lincoln. I have visited Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, both the battlefield and the cemetery. It's a special place for our country, and it's a special place for me personally, so I'm honored to share this background story with you today. On November 19th, 1863, Americans gathered in a quiet Pennsylvania farm town called Gettysburg. Now, just 4 months earlier, in July 1863, this land had been the site of the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. More than 50,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. Farms were destroyed, families were shattered, and the nation itself was uncertain whether it would survive. The full construction on the cemetery wasn't even finished yet, but the reason people gathered that day was simple. They were there to dedicate a cemetery for the dead. But the question facing the country was much larger than how to honor fallen soldiers. The real question was this: what is the United States of America? And is this idea of America an idea worth saving? By 1863, the United States was no longer one nation. It was two groups of people torn apart. The Civil War was not Americans fighting a foreign enemy. It was American versus American, brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. The southern states had broken away and formed the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. And the reason they gave for leaving the Union matters to this story. The Confederacy was not just a political rebellion, it was built on a completely different idea of what a nation should be. So the United States back in 1776 had been founded on a belief written in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. The Confederate Vice President, Alexander Stephens, said something very different. He declared that the Confederacy was founded on what he called a great truth, that black people were not equal to white people. So these were not small disagreements. These were two opposing philosophies about human equality, democracy, and who America was for. And so the Civil War became the violent collision of these two ideas. To understand why that moment at Gettysburg mattered so much, you need to understand a little bit more about Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln believed slavery was wrong, deeply wrong. He believed that it violated the basic idea that people were born with natural rights. But he also believed that if the United States fell apart, the idea of democracy itself might fail with it. So because of that, Lincoln believed his first responsibility was to preserve the Union, to save the country. Not because slavery did not matter, but because without the Union, the promise of equality would never be fulfilled. From a young age, Abraham Lincoln was raised with strong moral values about fairness and human dignity. His father, Thomas, believed slavery was wrong and refused to benefit from it. His stepmother, Sarah, encouraged Lincoln's love of reading, of reflection, and empathy. Together, the two most important adults in his life shaped Lincoln's belief that a person's worth did not come from wealth, race, or power, but from simply being human. Those values stayed with Lincoln for the rest of his life and shaped how Lincoln viewed the Declaration of Independence. For Lincoln, the Declaration was our North Star. It was our mission statement. When Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal, Lincoln did not believe he was saying that America already lived up to that idea. He believed that Jefferson was setting a standard that future generations would be responsible for pursuing. In Lincoln's mind, the Declaration was a promise, but it was a promise that had not yet been fully kept. And so the Civil War was testing whether that promise still mattered, whether we could still honor that promise that was made when our country was born. By 1863, the war was going badly in human terms. Hundreds of thousands of Americans were dead by that point. Families across the North and South were grieving, and people were beginning to ask whether this huge human sacrifice was even worth it. Gettysburg changed the course of the war militarily, but it also forced the nation to confront a moral question. After all these Americans have died, if nothing in America has changed, then what would their deaths even mean? In Lincoln's view, they fought for the idea that a nation based on equality and self-government could survive. And if that idea failed, then their deaths would be meaningless, and Lincoln refused to accept that. So when Lincoln arrived at Gettysburg, he stood at a crossroads in American history. Behind him were hundreds of thousands of dead Americans. In front of him was an uncertain future. Two visions of America were still fighting for survival. One believed in human equality, even if it had not yet lived up to it. The other vision of America completely rejects the idea of human equality. What happens next in that cemetery on that day in November would help decide which vision of this nation is going to endure. Lincoln's task that day was not to describe the battle. It was to remind the living of why our nation exists in the first place, and to challenge Americans to decide what kind of country would come after the war was over. Now, just a quick personal side note. This story that I just shared with you just now is pretty much the story that I shared with Rio Norte students here in this photo back in 2011. Like I said, this is personal to me. This matters. This is really important to me, and this is a real special place. So when you read the Gettysburg Address today, I hope some of what you hear today sticks with you. I hope you remember that our nation was tearing itself apart. I hope you remember the promise of the Declaration of Independence. I want you to remember the belief that sacrifice must have meaning. And in this speech, Lincoln needs to do more than just honor the dead. But you can read it and decide for yourself if Lincoln is able to create that greater meaning that he's hoping for. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the Gettysburg Address.